Asbestos. Asbestos is the generic name that refers to 6 unique minerals: chrysotile, amosite, chrysotolite, anthophyllite, tremolite, and actinolite. These naturally occurring mineral fibers were widely used in building materials, vehicle products, and insulation materials because of their strength and resistance to corrosion and heat. Asbestos fibers are hazardous when workers are exposed to them. The main route of exposure to asbestos is inhalation of dust and fibers. Activities that disturb asbestos-containing materials can release asbestos fibers into the air, allowing the fibers to be inhaled by workers. Activities that may disturb asbestos-containing materials include manufacturing asbestos-containing products, performing brake or clutch repairs, and renovating or demolishing buildings or ships and the cleanup from these activities. Other activities include contact with deteriorating asbestos-containing materials and cleanup after natural disasters. Asbestos exposure can lead to serious health effects that cause death, including chronic lung disease, asbestosis, lung cancer, and mesothelioma. The Occupational Safety and Health Administration, or OSHA, has the following exposure limits for asbestos. Permissible exposure limit, or PEL, of 0.1 fiber per cubic centimeter of air as an 8-hour time-weighted average, and excursion limit, or EL, of 1.0 fibers per cubic centimeter over a 30-minute period. Companies must make sure workers are not exposed to asbestos above exposure limits. Companies must perform assessments and monitor workers to determine if exposure is at or above the PEL or EL, if workers can be expected to be exposed to asbestos. Requirements for workers to be provided with medical surveillance depend on the industry. In general industry, workers must be provided with medical examinations if they experience exposure at or above the PEL. In the construction and shipyard industry, workers must be provided with medical surveillance if they engaged in certain classifications of work or experience exposures at or above the PEL. Materials suspected to contain asbestos should be left alone, and an assessment of the worksite must be done to determine if asbestos is present and if the work to be performed will create airborne fibers above the PEL. Materials presumed to contain asbestos, especially if installed before 1981, include thermal system insulation, roofing and siding shingles, vinyl floor tiles, plaster, cement, putties, and caulk, and ceiling tiles and spray-on coatings. All workers who work in areas with presumed asbestos-containing materials, but not at the PEL, must have asbestos awareness level training. All workers who are exposed at or above the PEL must be properly trained before work begins and on a yearly basis in order to work with asbestos-containing materials. Do not perform work in or on any area that contains asbestos unless you are properly trained to do so. Companies must use engineering controls and safe work practices to reduce worker exposure to the lowest level achievable through methods that include negative air pressure ventilation and filtration, or HEPA equipment, and wet removal techniques. Other methods include enclosure techniques, glove and bag use, and good housekeeping. If engineering controls and safe work practices cannot reduce exposures below the PEL, workers must be provided with and use proper personal protective equipment, or PPE, to prevent exposure, including respiratory protection. Companies must use proper hazard communication and mark areas that have exposures above the PEL or EL with warning signs. Workers should not eat, drink, or smoke in these areas. Asbestos is a serious health problem when workers are exposed above safe exposure limits. If you suspect your work may be exposing you to airborne asbestos, alert your company so that the proper assessment can be done. Training, engineering controls, safe work practices, and PPE must be used to reduce exposure below the PEL if the assessment determines that asbestos exposure is at or above the PEL. Your lungs are a vital part of your life. Make sure you protect them. Stay safe.